Friday the 13th serves as a dichotomy for how individuals perceive diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are so many reasons that this particular day means different things to different people. And when we think about life and we think about experiences, we think about diversity, not just diversity as it relates to race, gender, and things of that nature. It really is about even diversity of thought. The Perspective View podcast by CC America LLC is a show dedicated to discussing diversity, culture, and context beyond the boardroom. DEI today is more than a buzzword on a billboard. It is creating safe spaces for varying perspectives, ideas, and experiences without fear of being canceled because you don't conform. Let's tear down the walls together and build a new foundation with an open mind and understanding that the world revolves around the context of perspective. Thank you for tuning back in to the Perspective View podcast. I am your host, Tomeria Jordan, and today we are talking about Friday the 13th and how Friday the 13th serves as a dichotomy for how individuals perceive diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the reason that I chose that is, of course, because today is Friday the 13th, but Friday the 13th, when we think about it, has many meanings to different individuals based on culture, based on background, based on belief. There are so many reasons that this particular day means different things to different people. And when we think about life and we think about experiences, we think about diversity, not just diversity as it relates to race, gender, and things of that nature. It really is about even diversity of thought. And it means variety. When we think of what the term diversity means by definition, it is really looking at a variety of ideas, opinions, perspectives. And so when I started to do some research on Friday the 13th and how some cultures may look at this particular date, it's really interesting because for some cultures, this is a day of bad luck. And in other cultures, it's just another day. It really just depends on where you may have been born. It depends on what your experiences may have been within your family, amongst your circle of friends. And so, given the nature of this day, many people may face the day differently. I will say for me, I am someone who believes in positivity. And so there was a time in my life where I was superstitious, but I wondered, is that because that was how I am, or is that because that is what I saw? And so I realized for me, oftentimes it came from our experiences. So as a kid, there were things that used to make me nervous, but I didn't necessarily know why, aside from what someone said. And so when you look up the term superstitious, it means having or showing a belief in superstitions. An example of a superstition is something like a black cat. It's a belief or practice considered by non-practitioners to be irrational or supernatural, attributed to fate or magic, perceived supernatural influence, or fear of that which is unknown. So growing up, I would hear people say things like, if a black cat crosses your path, then you're going to have bad luck. And I am a believer in things that if you believe something strong enough, sometimes I think you can bring it to fruition, because any instance of that, you will attribute the activities that come after that to your superstition. And it's almost like when you think about confirmation bias. And I love talking about this topic as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, because as a diversity facilitator, it was interesting when we talked about confirmation bias. And if you're not familiar with what that means, confirmation bias is really looking at what you believe and how it is confirmed by experience. So, for instance, you if you're a waitress and you believe that a certain demographic of people don't tip, whenever those individuals come into your restaurant subconsciously, because you hold this stereotype, you might be more inclined to provide them with a different level of service than you may provide your other patrons. As a result, you now have created, in a sense, a barrier between you and that client because you already have a preconceived notion about them before you begin to serve them. So in turn, your service may actually change. But not thinking about the fact that you may be changing how you interact with that individual or that group of individuals, you may change how you deliver your service. But if those individuals don't tip, you may believe it's because they are in that particular demographic group, not because of anything that you actually did from a service perspective. And so when we think about things like this, it is important for us to consider things in the context of perspective because we all have different upbringings. We all have different experiences. And sometimes we have shared experiences, which of course bring that commonality and give us something that we can talk about. And even if they are diverse experiences, that brings the beauty of life, the variety that we can learn from someone else. We can learn about their experience. So what I thought was interesting once I started doing some research on the background of Friday the 13th, it really is interesting to hear that it just depends. It really just depends on, again, where you grew up. In Western cultures, it became superstitious, and it was because of the Gregorian calendar, and it happens at least once a year and can occur up to 3 times in the same year, but having the 13th fall on a Friday. And so when you look up the history of what made it unlucky, there are folklore historians who've said things that this was based on Norse mythology. So Donald Dosey, he was a folklore historian who said that it originated with a Norse myth about 12 gods who had a dinner party, and there were the 12 gods, but there was the 13th guest who was not invited, Loki. And when that guest arrived, it is said that Loki arranged for Hor to shoot Balder, and when Balder died, the earth got dark. But then, when you think about Christianity, there's Christian associations also with the number 13. Some people say that because of Jesus' Last Supper and the crucifixion, there were 13 individuals present, and that on the 13th of Nisan, or Maundy Thursday, the night before his death on Good Friday, because they were there and present, that some people believe that it was a sign. And then with regard to the 19th century, there were other individuals who have made some documentations about the 13th. And one of those is, and please forgive me if I mispronounce the name, Giocoino Rossini. He died on Friday the 13th. And it says that in Italian culture, he regarded Fridays as an unlucky day and 13 as an unlucky number. So it was remarkable that on Friday the 13th, he passed away. And so there's so many ideas and so many other cultures that look at this. And going back to some other historical references, they talk about, even from a Christian reference, the chapter 13 of Revelations speaks of the Antichrist. What's even interesting is some people say that Judas was considered the 13th member of the Last Supper, the person who would ultimately betray Christ. In Turkey, there's superstitions regarding this date that recommends not starting a journey on this date. In ancient Greece, an enemy of the gods of ancient Greece, Typhon, was the god of volcanoes. And in some cultures, Tuesday coincides with the day of bad luck. So in Turkey, in Greece, those days are on Tuesdays. And also, even in Spain, there's a belief that says don't get married on Tuesdays or go on a trip because it's an unlucky day. And when we think about these and the 13th, so you notice that today is Friday the 13th. I am in America. So Friday the 13th in America has its own meaning. But the transition to Tuesday the 13th for superstitions in Turkey or Greece or Spain, they still equate with the 13th, but it's a different day. So that's an example of how things vary depending on culture and how it can be linked to other events. But what's even more interesting about this is pop culture. So when you think about pop culture, especially Western pop culture, one of the interesting things about this date is there was a movie that came out about Friday the 13th. And some people may remember this. The movie came out in the 80s, but it was a franchise series called Friday the 13th. It's a horror franchise that is comprised of 12, they call them slasher films, which includes TV series, novels, comic books, video games, and even merchandise supporting this particular franchise. And it really focuses on a fictional character called Jason Voorhees. And the background is, in this fictional story, is that he drowned as a boy at this lake. And decades later, it was rumored to be cursed. And so it set the setting for mass murders. And some people like horror films, others do not. And so when you think about pop culture, you think about history, you think about folklore, everyone comes from a different reference point. They have a different perspective. They have a different vantage point of view. And there's a movie called Vantage Point, and that movie is really good because it really highlights this very thing, is the fact that how you see things really just depends on your point of view. And that movie came out in 2008, if anyone is interested in checking it out. But it was an action thriller, but I thought it was awesome from the standpoint that it helped you think about how in life we all see things from a different point of view. And so in this particular movie, they were trying to unravel the assassination attempt of a president, but they were seeing it from different viewpoints. And so when you think about life, you think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. You think about your own personal perspectives and what colors your canvas. It really depends on your background. It depends on your experience. It depends on so many factors. So if I were to start my day thinking that, today is going to be a bad day, anything that happens that's bad to me, similar to that example that I provided earlier of confirmation bias, I might believe it's because it's Friday the 13th. But if I start off this day from a positive vantage point or positive standpoint, and I say, you know what, regardless of the day, I'm going to believe that I'm going to be okay and that everything will work out for my good, then my perspective, if something bad happens, it's not going to be attributed to the day. It's just going to be that's a particular instance that happened, but it's not tied to that day, because if that were the case, then every Friday the 13th would be a bad day for me. So it really just depends on how we look at things. So today I just encourage you to reflect and really be introspective about why you may believe what you believe. And in some instances, maybe doing a little research and challenging our belief systems to see, is this something that I really want to take on and, believe for myself? Or am I taking on this particular belief or perspective because that was what I was taught? That was what I experienced? That is what I saw? Or that is what I heard? Sometimes those things can be really positive things and really good things, but sometimes what we may believe might not be as positive, and that's okay. Some people may choose to, maintain that superstition. For me personally, I chose as I became an adult not to believe in those things. And I thought about it one day as I was driving my car. I used to draw a cross on my windshield because that's what I saw other people do growing up. And then as I grew up, I was like, why am I doing that? It's a cat. There's cats of different colors. And I noticed that oftentimes, even if the cat crossed my pathway, nothing bad happened. But if I believed that something bad was going to happen, anything that happened that was bad, I would have attributed to the black cat. And so because I didn't, when I see a black cat, I have no thought with regard to the black cat at this point. And I do recognize that there are some things with regard to why people feel that way about black cats. And maybe we'll talk about black cats on another episode in more detail, and why individuals may feel the way they do about the significance of a black cat. But for the purposes of today, I really did want to highlight how just looking at something as simplistic as Friday the 13th, what may be simplistic to me may be more complex for someone else. Again, it is their right to have that view. It's a different viewpoint. It's a different perspective. And it is all shaped by that individual's experiences. So we all have that right. So just continue to keep an open mind. Be kind to others. You never know what they're going through. And always learn, because you will be surprised what you can find out by doing a little bit of research, and also just by talking to people to help understand their perspective. So, on that note, until next time, keep an open mind. Thank you for tuning in to the Perspective View podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and share the show with others. We value your feedback, so please be sure to rate the show and leave us a comment so we know how we're doing. Also, this helps us share a message with more individuals around the world regarding different experiences and perspectives.